All right, let's go ahead and get underway. We're still in chapter 5, and the title for chapter 5 is Together, but we're in week number 8. If you are watching this online, we are at week number 8 here in our study. But again, we're continuing in chapter number 5. A quick review before we get into new material. This is one of the first times throughout the study that I've been able to keep what was on the board last week for this week, so thank you for talking enough last week that it took us 2 weeks. What I've learned as a teacher is that you better write stuff down, because when you go off the cuff, you're liable to say something you don't know what to say, so it's good to keep some notes and have everything in order. We talked about a major premise last week, which really deals with the aspect of church family. If you're going to call yourselves a church family, then what?
Act like it.
Then act like it. Very good answer. If you're going to call yourself a church family, strive to be a church family. Does that mean you're going to be a perfect church family? No. But there is, I think, in God's eyes, a great deal about striving or fighting to be a church family versus just saying it in name and not really putting forth the effort to try to achieve it, to achieve that community. We also looked at the evidence that a church that operates with a producer-consumer mindset will never exist as the spiritual family God desires us to be. And the reality that we looked at last week for that is quite simply, if we treat our church members as if they are simply consumers of what we as a church has to offer, if we train them that way, if they begin to be facilitated in that manner, eventually the returns that we will get on that investment are similar to what you would get in any business. Eventually it's going to run out. You're going to lose those consumers after a while. They're going to find something better, and they'll never be the closest or community that you really achieve with God's plan for the church. I love this next question. What would church membership consist of with Jesus? We looked at those scriptures last week and looked and came up with the mindset that his number one thing would be to do what?
Listen, teach, and care.
The first thing would be to please God, to do God's will, right? And the second one would be to live out a public faith relationally, which would also be that he would serve, teach, care, and maintain unity with one another. And last but not least, last week we read, I don't know how many, but a lot. There were at least 70 that I read last week, one another commands in Scripture. And the truth is, how can you fulfill a one another command if you're not with one another? So we pick up today with this question. With everything we've seen so far in chapter 5, and if you've read chapter 5, how does this compare to modern church membership? Somebody in your own definition, describe for me what is modern church membership.
Show up on Sunday or show.
Okay.
Maybe go home and not come back till next Sunday.
Okay. What else?
Get it on your phone, and you're considered, that's it, I'm done.
What's that? Say it again. I got to hear that.
Look at it on your phone.
Yeah, look at it on your phone or your iPad or now your smart TV.
Yeah. Sit at home and do it. Like, okay, I've done my part.
Yeah.
And not to be negative, but I think it just happens to us as we come to church and we gravitate towards those people that we're looking forward to seeing, and we socialize with them and we shake their hands, check and see how they're doing. And there's a whole large group of other folks there that we're not even aware of there, really. Again, not for any malicious reason, just kind of the habit we get into.
In modern church membership, though, Mike, don't you think that's kind of just when people just wink at that and go, "That's normal"?
Of course.
Modern church membership doesn't say that you're required to do anything else. You know, you're here to touch base with the familiars in your life, and you're not required to reach out beyond that, because that would put you outside of your comfort zone, right, Debbie?
Well, there may be a question too, but I see sometimes that we treat each other or as a family as we did as we were growing up with our family. You know, we expect the same things as our immediate family, not the church, you know. And so we treat people the same way. Sometimes, I mean.
I'm having a hard time.
Okay, it's like, you know, if we come from a dysfunctional family in the world,
Okay.
then we expect the same
Out of our church family?
out of the church, or we expect more, something different when it doesn't, then we.
Okay. It makes sense. I think it's possible that and we do this with our own relationships. Whatever the way that we grew up in a family, we often do what with our own family?
Repeat.
Yeah, we repeat. We have the cycles that continue on. So, yeah, I would think it's possible that we do that with our church family. We take whatever dysfunction or function we had in our physical families, and maybe we apply it to our church families. What else?
I think also the point, as he was pointing out in the book, is that we believe it's between me and God.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the songs that I kept thinking about when I was reading chapter 5 is, "My God and I go in the fields together. We walk and talk as good friends should and do." And the idea is not, that song is not promoting this idea. Don't get me wrong. But the author is correct. We've made church membership about your private relationship with God, and to extend it out any further than that is not required. It's all about you and God, and you and God only. Even the billboards you see today advertise about your personal relationship with God. And if you come be a part of this church, it will help you to have your private relationship with God. What else?
And as he's also saying, is that a lot of books that you kind of invest in teach you that. It's showing you that it's important to have a relationship with God, and you could have this personal relationship with God. That's somehow being brainwashed into believing it's me and God, and not the other way around.
What about this? What about setting your calendar? What does that have to do with church membership? A lot. In the modern church membership, there's a certain number of things that you're expected to be a part of, and not really anything else. What are you kind of expected to be a part of as a modern day church member?
Sunday morning worship,
Sunday morning worship,
Wednesday evening worship,
Wednesday evening Bible class. Now that depends on the church, right? Fellowship meal, maybe once or twice a year. A special event. And that is pretty much the limit for modern church membership, right? Well, we've named several things, but I think the problem is, and maybe you can tell me how you feel about this, I think we developed, instead of Christianity, we've developed a concept called churchianity. And I think, unfortunately, too many of our congregations are falling short of Christianity and are promoting this idea of churchy. I don't think they would ever say that, and I'm not telling you they would ever say it publicly. I don't think anybody would ever say, yeah, we're promoting churchianity. No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that we've conditioned ourselves and others that it's about churchianity, which is about me and God, versus Christianity, when it's about what? Us and God. And I think the biggest problem with this particular concept of churchianity is that it's one of those things that happens that I just don't feel like we pay enough attention to. Or maybe it's become so normal that, let me see if I can put it this way. You ever had somebody come over to your house and they can find everything that's dirty about your house, but you've been living in it and you don't see it?
It's called a mother-in-law.
It's called a mother. This stream will now be deleted. For the safety of Cherry Jones.
And we know your mother-in-law, so be careful with that.
It's no longer here with us.
Okay, well, listen, no, it's a real reality that when people see people come into our homes, they see our messes a lot more than we do. And it's the same with churches. When guests come into your church, they see your faults and your messes a lot quicker than you do as a church member who's been there for a long time. And I can tell you from experience, we often get offended very easily when people who are new to our congregations point out issues that maybe we have in this area, because we want to believe that our church is just doing everything it can to be that true church family that God intends. But the reality is, I think many times we've been conditioned to this idea of churchianity versus Christianity.
Jonathan,
Go ahead.
I think there's another aspect of that as well.
Okay, let's hear it.
There's some people that gravitate to church because of their friends, and they don't have a relationship with God. They come to be with their friends.
Yep. And that's a reality. And the question is, hopefully those friends that are in that church are disciples and are committed to making disciples. I don't have a problem, honestly, if somebody comes to Waters Road because they have friends who are here. But what I do have a problem with is when it continues to be, well, I'm just here because my friends are here. I'm not here because I want to be a disciple. And my friends aren't encouraging me to be a disciple. They're just encouraging me to be here on Sunday morning. That's when I feel like that becomes a problem. Initially, I think that's a good thing, right? Relationally, you got neighbors, you got friends, you invite them. They come because they what? That you're there. They like you, and they think, well, this person looking out for my best interest. They're going to invite me to something good. And so that's okay. That's a great point, Charles. Family is God's vessel for the development of both children and disciples. What do I mean by that? Think about children for a moment. The children struggle to develop when they're in broken homes.
Sure.
Yes.
Do you know the percentages of children in our nation right now that are growing up in broken homes? It's over 65%. And to look at that number, and Jennifer was in Arizona this week and was working with George Barna, and George Barna has put out the evidence that it's not only affecting our nation, but it's affecting our churches, because most of our churches now are dealing with the effects of broken homes.
You know, when it shows up on TV and they show this famous singer and he's got 7 girlfriends and they're all expecting, how can kids comprehend that? That's just wrong. They're not married. They're just having kids. And that's what they're seeing, and they're seeing it even worse than that.
Jerry, culturally, there is such a great variety of family elements. There are some cultures within our nation where family is still very important and very much a central figure in their lives. And in some cultures within our country now, family has become an afterthought. It's become, and I think some of that has just been conditioned by time and environment and repeated cycles. And it kind of goes back to something Debbie mentioned there, but it's true. If you grew up in a broken home, do you know what the percentage is that you're going to have a broken home? It's over 78%. That's a hard cycle to break. I don't want you to raise your hand because I don't want anybody to be embarrassed, but if anybody in this room grew up in a broken home, then I think you know some of the challenges that you faced and how easy it would be for you to repeat that same situation in your own life.
But there's also sometimes somebody that, I know we have a friend in Louisiana whose family were all alcoholics. The daddy was an alcoholic. All the children became an alcoholic except one. And he said, he's now a Christian, and he said, I don't want that kind of life. So there's always an exception of saying, I know I kind of went that way. I saw my mother kind of being involved in my brother's life a little bit too much. And so I didn't mind moving to Wisconsin. So I didn't have to, so I could be with Dan and we just have our own family. So there's always sometimes that people
and I think people sometimes become so frustrated with that existence that they decide, when I get married, I'm not going to be like that.
Yeah.
But you know how many people have made that that statement and ended up like that? I mean, that's happened. There's things about my father that I'd say, I'm not going to be that way. It's very easy to be that way. Mike?
So, Fawn, I worked with a guy named Mike Cradgick. He died at 44 with brain cancer. But he made a comment to me. He said, Mike, a job is just a job until you take ownership of it. And when people talk bad about it, it's like they're talking bad about you. And I thought about that, and I think about the church. The more we invest ourselves in the lives of others, the more ownership we have, and the more sense of purpose and significance we build into our own lives, so that things never bother us as much because we're more concerned about the lives of the people we've invested ourselves into. But if we're not invested in the lives of others, any little thing can be a reason to leave and walk out because we're not heavily invested in it. It's kind of like the guy that's rowing the ship doesn't complain about it, but the guy that's sitting back there, they're not rowing fast enough. They're not doing this, because they're not rowing. When you grab an oar and you're working, you tend to complain less.
Okay, let's take what you said, Mike, and let's put that into the development of a child. How many of you have had children in this room? Okay. I'm going to take the word investment because that's the word you used, right? How much of investment do we have in a child? When we're raising a child, how much investment do you make in your child?
100%, probably.
100%.
Hopefully. What ways do you invest in your child?
Time, money.
Okay, somebody said education. Well, I don't have any room on the board, so I'm not going to write it. Education. What else? Spiritual investment. Okay, what else?
Money.
Financial. Time. Health,
Emotional.
well-being.
Emotions.
Emotional.
Values.
Okay.
Hopefully show them love.
Love. Yeah, better not forget that one. Okay, so all those things, all very important. Now, if we're being honest, the scripture has painted a picture that we are to love like the Father has loved us. He said, in this, they will know me, they will know my love by what? By our love. And how are we supposed to love? See, it's one of those things where he's already given us the answer. How are we supposed to love another person? What does he say? Love as what?
I have loved.
I have loved you. How much did God invest in you?
100%.
Everything.
Gave the life of his only son.
Okay, so we believe that God invested everything in us. We believe that we should invest everything in our children. The Bible has painted the picture that each one of us in this room, relationally, are in the body of Christ. We're all what? Family. So how much investment does God expect you, Myrna, to make, and Jennifer back there?
100%.
100%.
Well, what if you don't like your brother or sister? No.
We love the wine.
Little humor.
What we don't have, we
It's a great point, though, Mike. Do you have how many children, Myrna?
2.
2. Do you love both those children equally?
Yes, I'm not going to say no to the next. Equally but different.
We don't always like them at the same time.
There you go.
But
That's the point is everyone. I've got 5 children. Are there things about parts of my children that I like and parts that I don't like?
Sure.
Yeah. That's human. That's human. So you're going to have relationally ups and downs with your children, your wife, your husband, and even your church family. But somehow, in our Western culture, we've made Christianity an acceptable way to not quite love people with the investment that we do our own children, our husband, our wife. The expectation that God gives us is that we are to love one another as He has loved us, which means unconditionally, everything, you put it all in there, right?
So there's a difference between like and love, though. You can love somebody but not like the way they behave.
There's no doubt about that. But
Even our
still,
children.
the structure that holds that relationship together is love.
That's right.
Well, going back, to the family, I kind of have to invest in my family because they're there all the time. And I kind of know what they're going to do. I mean, it's kind of comforting to know that, they may do this or this. Well, in a church family, I don't always know what the other person is thinking because I don't see them all the time like I do my regular family.
Yeah, it's like this, Debbie, and we've said this last week just in a little way. It's hard to have a relationship with somebody you only see once a week.
That's right.
But is that the way God intended it?
No.
We should have family worldwide that accepts us in the name of Christ as brother and sister, whether we've ever met or anything. Our common bond is Jesus.
I think the struggle that I have with this book and everything that I read in this book is that it's where we should be,
But how do you get there?
but how do we get there?
Sure.
Little by
And
little.
do we just go, well, it's not realistic, so just not even going to try? Because I think that's our ultimate, for a lot of us, that's our ultimate response is, well, this looks great. I would love to have this, but
It's like a mountain, but then a little at a time is the only way to do it.
I think you're
I
exactly
don't know
right.
how that is, but
But for
That's the
mercy's
only way
sake,
we
it's
could do it.
like Debbie mentioned, you're in a home with family. You have this constant, intimate relationship where you understand their tone of voice, the language they use, their body English intimately due to constant contact. I have been left feeling, and this goes back to the last series, the Go-To series, feeling like a total failure. And it has started to affect me the last couple of weeks that I am not doing enough. And I have yet to hear anything that can tell me or lead me to understand or come up with God speaking to me in prayer or whatever of how I can accomplish the individual connection
It almost seems
with
insurmountable.
300 people in our congregation that I have with my immediate family.
First, Mike, then Kathy.
I was thinking about if we go back to the child, kind of looking at what we do with our children. One of the things that we did in our family, we made our children have a job and tasks to do. Everybody needs a job. Everybody needs a responsibility in a family. But in the church, you can actually come with zero responsibilities assigned to you and no accountability. And I think that's the breakdown.
That's modern church membership.
Modern church membership. And I think that's where he's going. It's the breakdown of the church was gradual. In the early church, everyone had everything in common and they shared as any had need and they were all servants.
They were next door neighbors.
But the
literally in
key,
little
Mike,
holes.
the key in this is it was equal investment.
Right. Regardless of rich or poor, it was an equal investment.
The problem in the church today is we don't require equal investment.
And we're not taught it.
No, we're not taught it,
Even
Kathy.
when I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I'm looking at it different. I can't meet everybody's need. I can't meet everybody in this room's needs. That's not realistic. I don't believe God expects me to do that. But, some people got together and took some meals, I understood, to Rebecca and Al. I've been sick. I couldn't do that. Sue knew I was sick, and she knew I had a rebound, and I had a trip to the ER on Friday, and she checked on me every day because she knew me. It's hard for me in this time of my life to know what Carol's going through. I have an idea because I lived through that, but not exactly. It's hard for some people to know how to relate to a widow. I thought I understood being a widow, but it's different when you're in that boat. So you kind of look for the people who have things in common with you and try to minister to them in the congregation. Am I making sense?
And the key to that, Kathy, is that if everybody was committed to doing that, then those needs that you're speaking of would be filled. The problem is that's not happening. it's a smaller percentage that are doing what a Miss Sue is doing for you.
Yeah.
If everybody had those connections and was, the scripture does not make it a responsibility that you are required to care for the needs of all the people.
Right.
Let's make that clear. You're to have a relationship with all the people, but there's no realistic way for you to have the intimate, deep relationship with everybody that you're going to have with those in a large church, that you're going to have with those in which you're truly closely connected with, okay? But through that connection that you have with that person has a connection with that person. And that's how you learn of the additional needs and are able to try to fill those needs whenever you can. But again, I don't think God requires you to go back to the first part of your statement. I don't think God requires each person in here to meet the needs of every person.
I think that's what this book kind of brings out in a way. If I understood what Alan was saying, how am I going to do all this? Well, and then there's another part that plays in that. My kids bounced back from COVID. So Sunday, I was here at church. I took Sue out to eat, took her home, went to the grocery store, and loaded things, went to their house, and did too much. Because Jacob and Chris, I heard, they went back to work after a week and everything. But they're 25 years younger than me. And I guarantee you, I didn't understand. I've heard my home husband say, when you retire, don't sit down and do nothing. No, I'm not going to sit down and do nothing. But I have to do things in a different way because I don't have the energy I had 25 years ago, even without COVID.
Here's the thing, Kathy, and then we'll move on. I think the biggest problem we have in the church is that when I look at the situation with King David, when King David was a young teenager, he goes out and does what?
Kills the lion.
And then later, just a few years later, becomes what? King David. And he was one of the only warrior kings in history that most warrior kings, guess what happened to them? They got killed. And David stayed on. He kept living. And then later on in his life, he faced another giant, which was not even close to the size of Goliath. It was a much smaller giant. And this particular giant had him face down in the dirt. Why? Because he had gotten older. And he didn't have the energy and the spunk that he had had 40 or 50 years younger, okay? And it took his nephew Abishai to save his life that day. But after that day, did he go, well, I'm done, y'all, I'm going to quit being king. I'm going to go, there's a rest home over here. I'm going to sit in and relax for the rest of my life. Is that what he did? No. They said to him, we cannot have the light of Israel be extinguished. So you need to come off the battlefield. But there are so many other ways that you can service as a king. I think the problem in the church is we go, well, I'm getting older now, so it's time for the young folks to take over. I've heard that so many times. There's never a point in time, no matter what our age is, that God hasn't got, as long as we're living, a way that we can serve our church family. It may not be in the big, gigantic, flashy ways we did 20 or 30 years earlier, but there's still a way. Debbie?
Well, with the family, like, since I'm supposed to be the adult in the house with my family, we make decisions on what our kids or what we do. In the church, it's not just us that are making those decisions, so it's sometimes hard for us to know how we can serve when we don't know what. Because we're
well,
not
and here's what the church has done. Because of that issue, here's what the church has done, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we ever made in our culture, is we go, well, let's form 10 programs to meet the needs. And we have a program over the widows, we have a program over the bereaved, we have a program over this, and we go, all right, church. Plug in.
They compartmentalize.
There you go.
Everything. And that's the same thing that the medical approach does now. They compartmentalize, give it a name and put it in this slot. Government does, education does, everybody does. And we look around at that and we go, okay, this is what's wrong with secular world. And yet here we are doing the same
thing in the church. And it's the reason why people don't plug in, because people plug in more relationally or organically when it's an opportunity to serve that comes about because of relationships versus go sign up in the foyer Sunday morning if you want to do that. But as we said last week, sometimes we program something because why? We want to try to do what? Spur people to do it organically.
So that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing, but
because we have some of those right now.
yeah, but when we become overly dependent on a program to accomplish what organically love should compel us to do, that's the problem, right? All right. Let's talk about the benefits to the community and family approach. The first thing community facilitates that we're going to talk about this morning is love. How does community facilitate love?
It's hard to show love to people that are not in proximity to one another. So the whole idea of family allows us to express love.
We can love each other better the more we are around each other. And I would put it to you this way, when it comes to our, what I like to call our love level, I think you can see how our love level will go up the more we're around each other. Now, I've heard somebody come back at me on this, and I've said this before. I go, well, you know, the more I get to know some of my brothers, the less I don't like them. The truth is, you're not approaching it with the right love. Because the way God loved you, He saw all your faults and loved you anyway.
Will Rogers discovered that when he said, I never met a man I didn't like. He found something in everybody to like, and if we're looking, we'll find it.
Yep. But the more we're around each other, the more opportunity, and I've seen this happen. I've seen people get together who really had nothing in common beforehand in the church, but after they were around each other, they found something that they could connect and unify upon. Okay? The second one. Someone read for us Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Galatians 6, verse 1 and 2. Somebody read that for us, please.
Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ.
All right. Community facilitates holiness. And this is a reality, folks. Listen, with our Sunday-centric approach to church, we have made it so that people hide, disguise their sinfulness 6 days a week. We've made it a reality that folks can walk into a church building on Sunday morning and appear to be one way, but are truly living a different way.
You know, I kind of relate that to, if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. I mean, I'm serious about that.
I know you're serious about that, and I think you're exactly, you know, Jerry, you're one of the most humble people I know. I would much rather a person have that attitude and approach the relationships than a person who says, I'm such a good person, everybody's going to love me. Because the reality is, Jerry, if we were truly around, you know, I look at this in my own marriage. Jennifer and I didn't know each other but just a few months before we married. We could have been engaged. Before Jennifer, I was engaged for 3 years to somebody. Even in an engagement, I didn't know who that person was. How many of you truly knew the person you were marrying until after you married them?
Not everything, for sure.
I mean, yeah, so if you want to share with the class, I'll take a seat.
We dated in high school, and then when he graduated from high school, a couple years ahead of me, he went to the military, and he got moved around. But when he finally got to one station, he was on the other side of the world, literally. And he stepped off the airplane, and well, we kept in contact. And mind you, back then there was no cell phone, there was no FaceTime, whatever. We communicated letters.
Letters,
We
yeah.
wrote letters.
You know, the thing on paper where everybody had to write stuff.
We wrote letters, and he would call maybe every 2 or 3 months in the middle of the night because he was on the other side of the world. So, what day did you step off the plane?
Shoot, I don't remember.
September.
Sometime in September.
September 1st, and we got married September 15th. We hadn't seen each other in a year and a half, 20 months, something like that.
How much did you learn though in your first year of marriage about one another?
The first year we were together maybe
3 months.
3 months.
Okay, so you didn't have a lot of time.
Not a whole lot.
No, he.
At some point, did it ever slow down? I mean, it had to have at some point, but
Yeah, well, that's
whenever it did slow down and you were actually able to live together and function together on a daily basis, I would imagine that you learned things about one another that you did not know beforehand.
Yeah, he learned that I couldn't cook, and I gave him food poisoning twice.
Jerry, I missed that last part.
If it didn't involve hamburger meat, I didn't know how to cook.
Hamburger helper's not bad.
That's what we looked on.
Jerry, the point being that I think I've looked at my own life and said, you know, if I was probably fortunate that the person I married was a short time, because I think sometimes you think, well, if somebody really got to know me, they wouldn't want to be in a real relationship with me. And I think that's why a lot of us keep others at arm's length. Or we put up some other, facade. Because the real idea here in Galatians 6:1-2 is that we're able to help each other stay on the straight and narrow. And you can't accomplish that via the Sunday-centric model that we have done for decades.
Yeah.
How can I really know your struggles if I only see you one time a week?
And if you don't talk at that time,
Yeah.
I mean, really.
If you're across the building and I never talk to you, I'm not gonna, Debbie?
Well, even seeing once a week, you won't know the struggles because when we walk in the building, we're supposed to be happy and glad to be
How are
there.
you doing?
And so you won't, most of the people won't know each other just because they were told when you walk in the building, you better be happy.
Well, listen, if you've never had an argument on the way to church with your spouse or your children and then got out of the car and acted like it was all peaches and cream, then you're lying.
I think
Listen, I think sometimes if people saw what went on in our house on a Sunday morning before church, that they would say, you need to sit down this morning and let somebody else
we've
preach.
all been there.
Yeah.
For me, too, it's a matter of just, I hate to say it, but it could be like laziness. Like you have your life, you have your routines, you're busy, you have this, that, you come home from work, you're tired or this and that. You have all your things, and it's hard to think about, spending time doing things for other people.
That's such a great
some
point.
things, when some things come up and an opportunity.
How many times? And I had
to get motivation.
I had the privilege of being a church member, just a regular church member, for a couple of years when we moved to Austin, and I think it was good for me to see the other side of the pew. When you're on this side of the pew for so long, sometimes you forget some of the challenges of the people that are sitting in the pew. And I feel like God did me a great service by allowing me to do that, because there were those times where there would be activities and opportunities connected to the church that we were part of. And just like you said, you come home, you're tired, you've been at work, you've been doing something all day, and you got your kids and they're tired. And it's so easy to just go, well, we'll do it next time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start that pattern,
it's a habit.
It gets easier and easier to say no. Yeah. And you
So
start.
am I alone in this?
No.
Y'all all feel that sometimes?
Oh, I can
Try
tell you,
to
I'm
look at the
relating
shoe
what you're
part
saying
and
because
go to church.
I'm in that
Yeah.
same position.
Yeah. So that's the holiness, though, is a really important part.
I would like to say this though, and when I lived in Trinidad, majority of the time, because we were a small congregation, the members lived close to each other.
Yep.
So we knew each other from a personal standpoint. In some cases, we were related to each other. We were family members. So it was easier to know each other and to be with each other. It was kind of a little difficult when I came to the States and it changed because now we were by ourselves without this extended family part of our bringing.
Yeah, I wish sometimes, Myrna, I could take everybody in this room and have them be part of a small country congregation where everybody lives in that same city and everybody, because, man, we have such a challenge. It's not a unique challenge, but it's a challenge when everybody is, like we said last Sunday morning, so spread out amongst a large radius of communities. And it makes it easier to have the excuses that we make, well, I can't drive 25 miles to this particular event because it makes it a much easier excuse versus when you live right down the street and somebody can knock on your door and go, where are you? Why are you not here?
Exactly.
I'll never forget when I preached in Camden, Alabama. It was a really small town, and it was like that. I mean, if you didn't come to an event of something that was planned, somebody's going to knock on your door and check on you.
Exactly.
Not because they were trying to keep tabs on you, just because they loved you and wondered if you were okay.
Right. And especially if you were involved a lot and you wasn't there, something
Yes.
was wrong.
Yeah. The next thing
It was the preacher.
what's that?
It was because you were the preacher. I mean,
But the preacher don't show up. That's usually a bad sign. The next thing the community facilitates is discipline. 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus are filled with commands to rebuke, reprove, and exhort those who need correction from the Scriptures. So what do we do today? Preacher, preach a sermon on X sin. So the preacher gets up in the pulpit, he preaches on that sin. Is that what God intended? How God intended for us to handle rebuking and exhorting people who are in sin? No. He expected it not to be done by the preacher, but to be done by the community, by one another. And let me say this, church discipline is one of the hardest subjects in the New Testament. I'll say this before we close up. Years ago, when I was preaching at Channelview, the elders asked me, they said, Jonathan, do you believe in withdrawal of fellowship? And I said, no, not in the way that we've been doing it. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, you can't adequately perform church discipline with somebody who doesn't have a relationship with you.
You can't take something away from them they never had.
And the whole point, if you read chapter 5, is that if you're a church and you try to kick somebody out of your church who doesn't have a relationship with you, you're not doing something scripturally. Because that person who has no relationship with you, if you say you're not allowed to be part of our congregation anymore, guess what they can do? Go right down the street and find another one. So to answer that question they asked me, I said, if we have a relationship with that brother or sister and we're fulfilling that command, then I think you have the option of the other. But until you have done that, you're whispering in the wind. And it's direct, it's personal, and the key is it's guided by love. And you can't have love if you don't have relationships. Okay? All right. 4 is equipping and growth. These are all in chapter 5, so you don't have to write these down. 5 is evangelism. And 6 is a greater love of God. Please remember, true togetherness starts with each individual looking out for the interest of others above his own. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4. All right, we'll go with chapter 6 next Sunday. And it's going to get good. It's one another chapter, one I've been waiting for. Looking forward to sharing with you next Sunday. We'll allow you to go ahead and be dismissed since we're out of time. Thank y'all.